Okay, we are online, and well, it's time for another weekly. I know these have not been weekly, but it's time for another MapPorn review video where we look at the MapPorn subreddit and go through the top posts of this week and get some comments from myself. So, I mean, if you're watching this non-live, feel free to skip this part if you're not interested. But basically, like I said, these have not been weekly by any means, and I think now I've found sort of a way to make it easier for me, because previously, I would record sort of an hour-long video, and then I'd have to edit it, and I'd also have to, find all the relevant maps and stuff that I'm referencing, and that took a lot of time. So what I did instead is I just wrote myself an outline, so I've already looked at these maps in advance. These are no longer like spontaneous, unprepared remarks. However, hopefully it'll just make the process a little bit easier for me, and that will allow me to actually post every single week, just like I said I would in the very beginning. So with that, we shall begin. Okay, so the first map here is male body hair density across the world. Well, yeah, I might as well sort of open that image in a new tab there. This is just the preview, I guess, but there's not much to see. And I think what this is supposed to represent is, well, the density of male body hair, right, represented with actual hair. And kind of a creepy map, kind of gross in my personal opinion. Certainly very provocative, very sort of effective. But yeah, I'm not really sure, first of all, well, I'm not totally sure how accurate this is. There is a nipple, by the way, which is crazy. But yeah, and so the comments, actually, if you do look inside the comments, it is confirmed that this is not a totally accurate map. So what would be an accurate map? Well, here is one example. So this represents the indigenous population. So Australia, the Americas, South Africa are, not accounting for the recent immigration in the last few hundred years. And so accordingly, sort of the Native American populations, which are descended from, of course, East Asians or Northeast Asians, Siberians, of course, they have very low prevalence of body hair. So the top seems to be here in the Mediterranean, which is kind of as expected. What was a little bit unexpected for me looking at this map is the North Sea, kind of Norway, Sweden, that whole area. I suppose the Vikings are known kind of for their beards, but still, it's kind of, I don't know if I really expected that area to be quite as hairy as the Mediterranean, but you can't argue with with the science. Also, there's the Ainu people here in Japan, kind of easy to skip by accident, but yeah, they are kind of a genetic anomaly, and even linguistically, people aren't quite sure where the Ainus really came from. They're different, obviously, from the main population of Japan, and at this point in history, they've pretty much either died out or assimilated into Japanese society. So there are some people who claim to identify as Ainu, but yeah, so that's kind of an interesting anomaly here. And then of course we have South India, Sri Lanka, sort of differs a little bit from let's say North India and from the surrounding areas. And Australia as well. Aboriginal Australians seem to have, I'm not totally sure what this percentage actually means. So this is something in German here. Durchschnittliche, I'm guessing this is just what percent of indigenous population, percent of indigenous men that have body hair. So in the Australian Aborigines, it's going to be 40% or something. But anyway, going back to this map, it's similar. It is kind of similar. I guess there's kind of these really weird little patches. You can't see my mouse again. I need to fix that. There's these bare patches in South America, kind of parts of Brazil, and then this area kind of in Eastern Europe, Russia, Australia. There's like these lines. I don't know if they represent like, waxing lines or like shaved or whatever, but not really sure what that means. Certainly it's not accurate. Certainly it's not accurate sort of in terms of the actual data. Latvians and Lithuanians are not significantly less hairy than Polish people, as we can see with this map. So, and I've got another map here that's also sort of supposed to be a little more accurate. And this one does take into account the recent migration patterns. And so you'll see that whereas the natives, The natives of the Americas pretty much are hairless for the most part, very sparse, both body hair, facial hair, and things like that. The recent immigrants are sort of are hairier. And again, especially in these areas that did receive more sort of Mediterranean and Western European immigration, and I guess Nordic as well. The Nordics seem to be hairy, which is sort of a surprise to me. I guess part of the reason it's a surprise is that one of the things mentioned in the comments is that this map, this original map here, doesn't take into account the actual sort of color of the body hair, and that's kind of the problem, right? Because a lot of people up here in this area are going to have blonde hair, and so their body hair, they might have substantial body hair, but it's not going to be like nearly as visible compared to a dark-haired Mediterranean person. And so maybe that's why I didn't sort of see Nordic people as being super hairy, even though they might be secretly, but it's not visible. So that was the first map here. Just close these tabs real quick. And the second map here is really cool. This is like a detailed hand-drawn map art of Addis Abeba, or Abeba, which is the capital of Ethiopia. So I think this is super cool. Honestly, there needs to be more stuff out there like this. This is genuine art. This is not sort of low effort cartography that we see on the internet oftentimes. I really wish kind of there was a little bit more of this and maybe a little bit less of this. Although I don't know, this is kind of the hair map is kind of a work of art in itself as well. But one thing I didn't do for this map is I didn't really look at the comments, so might as well just take a look real quick. Very cool map. So the person just seems to draw it by hand. Started off as a hobby, but I do sell them now. This piece was done as a commission for someone with a connection to Addis. Oh, okay. So this person. Okay, so this person, I thought they were like Ethiopian, like they were actually from Addis, but apparently not. Apparently it's just a commission. Pretty incredible. How do you correct errors? It's just too long a line of a smudge. Interesting. You stick a piece of paper on the stained place and then you scan it. That's really interesting, actually. That's not something I knew. Wow. Rulers, grids. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, frankly, if you had no talent whatsoever, what you could do is you could use a projector and just project the image onto a piece of paper and then just sort of trace it. I mean, I guess you would still need some talent. I shouldn't say no talent whatsoever. Although this one here clearly looks like a scan because it can't be the original drawing. The strokes are just too small for this pen here. Although this is a micron pen, but am I wrong actually? Am I wrong about that? I mean, 0.03. I don't know. I think that this particular drawing might be a scan and then it's slightly scaled down, but I don't know. But nonetheless, very, very cool. And I wish there was more of this just out on the internet, honestly. Okay, so the next map here is Countries with Monoethnicity is the title, where 85% of the population is a single ethnic group. So right off the bat, to me, this seems slightly wrong. Obviously, there is immigration in Western European countries. So it's quite possible that France might not be, England, maybe, not sure. Depends on how you define ethnicity, right? I mean, in England, I think it's done kind of by race. So Scottish, English, Welsh, and Irish people are kind of all considered one ethnicity, as opposed to, well, Asian or Black British people. But in Spain, it's, Englishmen are probably counted separate from Spaniards. So it's kind of inconsistent in that sense. And I mean, I don't know. Does Norway really have that many foreigners? I know there's quite a few probably in Oslo or something, but does Norway really have more than 15% of the population as being non-Norwegian ethnically? I don't know. And same with Belarus. There is, I suppose, a substantial population of people who identify as ethnically Russian, but does that mean... Well, I mean, the line between a Belarusian and a Russian is very... blurry oftentimes. So I don't know what this means. And then of course Ukraine is marked as a monoethnic country, which is crazy. If anything, Belarus is a monoethnic country. Ukraine is much more heterogeneous in terms of its ethnicity. So anyway, this map is very problematic. Han Chinese, right? I mean, is Han really a single ethnic group? That's sort of the classic controversial question. Another question, for example, Serbo-Croatian ethnicities. Again, I guess we're kind of going with sort of the state of the art, the sort of the Western idea that Montenegrins are separate from Bosnians, are separate from Serbians, and so on. So the idea of ethnicity is very... Well, the idea is not problematic per se, but making a map like this is problematic because the idea of what is ethnicity and what isn't is very context specific and very specific to the cultures within individual countries. So it's not easy to compare across countries like this. And you look at the Americas, right? And I mean, what does it mean to be, for example, Mexico, right? Are we doing it by race again? Is it Europeans versus mestizos versus Afro-Mexicans versus Mayans? Are those considered separate ethnicities, or are we considering all Mexicans as, not all, but the vast majority of Mexico is, after all, Mexican, right? They consider themselves Mexican. Is that an ethnicity? So very, very complicated stuff. And I will crack open the comments here, I suppose, just to see what people are saying, but I don't expect... I haven't checked actually this comments section yet. Somalia's on the edge. Yeah, people are much less critical here than Denmark has 86% of its population being ethnically Danish. Perhaps they're including Greenland and the Faroe Islands as well. Well, the Faroe Islands have an extremely small population. I mean, it's that barely counts. Oh, and sorry, I just noticed Stuart Wycliffe's messages. I don't know if you saw the earlier part of my sort of broadcast, but the reason I'm doing a live stream is because I don't want to edit this afterwards. I just want to record it and be done. So that's the only reason I'm doing a live stream. I'm not expecting people to actually watch this live for the most part. I just want to make a video, be done with it, and not have to really heavily edit it or anything, just because of my personal time constraints. I do want to keep making these videos, so I have to figure out the right format. And have I considered doing weekly map reviews for other subreddits or, for example, imaginary maps? I haven't considered it, but well, what I have considered is, I know for a fact that r/MapPorn is not the only place on the internet that has maps. In fact, there's been this sort of explosion recently of Instagram accounts that are creating map content, and it's very interesting. They all seem sort of oddly similar. I don't know if it's like a coordinated campaign. It's very interesting. But there does seem to be a proliferation of these Instagram accounts. So definitely there's maps out there beyond MapPorn, which was not always the case. It used to be that MapPorn, the subreddit, pretty much had a pretty good summary of the sort of the activity of the internet maposphere for that particular week or that particular month. But this is no longer the case. So yeah, I definitely have considered looking at other sources of maps. I haven't considered looking at other subreddits. But maybe one week I'll kind of try it out and just see what happens. So we'll see. Very much still in the process of figuring out the format for these videos and just how to produce them consistently and things like that. But I'm glad that there's some sort of interest, and there's, I do have a very, very small but persistent sort of base of viewers. So that's the good part. So back to the map here. Yeah, so anyways, okay, well, I'm glad that people here are, in this comment section, are confirming that this map is probably not correct. And normally in this case, I would even be motivated myself to just create a better version of this map, but because the idea of ethnicity is so complicated and so variable between different countries and different contexts, it's just impossible to make something like this. Excuse me. However, what is possible is to create a map where, for example, something slightly less ambiguous, let's say, like language. In the case of Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, of course, language is still a very contentious problem, in terms of defining what is and isn't a language. I suppose Mandarin as well. There's different dialects of Mandarin that are absolutely not mutually intelligible whatsoever, and yet it's considered a single language. But I think language is more consistent than ethnicity. And so what would be cool is a map like this of countries where 90% of people speak the same language. So I've made a note, and what I might do is create that and then post it on Twitter. So yeah, that's something that's interesting. So anyway, this map is not very good, so we shouldn't pay too much attention to it. Now here's the cool one. So number 4, well, cool, but right, there's a little trick. I do think it's absolutely amazing how similar the shapes of Vietnam and this is the Nile River in Egypt are. But and this actually fooled me. This totally fooled me. But Vietnam is not the same size here as the Nile River. So let me open up a map here showing a comparison. So the reality, if you actually look at it, again, it's very uncanny how close this curvature is, and how it opens up into the delta here. But unfortunately, it's a little too good to be true. Vietnam is actually quite large, quite a long country, and so it simply doesn't fit. So if we put the top of the Vietnam here right at the end of the Nile Delta, it goes all the way down almost to Khartoum here in Sudan. So what is that? That's approximately, gosh, well, to get a better idea, I'd have to put it on America, right? It's about 1,000 miles. About 1,000 miles top to bottom from Vietnam. France is famously, I think they keep saying it's 1,000 kilometers, and so if we put, that's about right, 1,600 kilometers and about 1,000 miles. So unfortunately, this comparison is just a little too good to be true. But very cool nonetheless how the shape is remarkably similar, I do have to admit. Okay, so it's a little different from my notes. I actually made them earlier today. Okay, so this map here, standards of paper dimensions. Open this guy up here. Okay, well, whatever. So first of all, I think we already saw this before in a previous video, something related to paper sizes. I'm not 100% sure though, but I remember, I think, talking about it because I was saying how I had some experience in Mexico. I was making a poster that I wanted to sell to people in Mexico, and I wasn't sure whether or not they used US letter or A4 size, because they are, of course, a metric country, but they're so close to the US that most of their consumer goods are either coming from the US or through the US, or they're packaged sort of for NAFTA. So it's kind of this is true for a lot of products that you buy in the US. They have labels in French, Spanish, and English, so that an importer can import it in, let's say, Los Angeles, and then bring it to any place pretty much in North America and just sell it. And so the Mexico ends up with a lot of goods that are packaged mostly for U.S. consumers because the U.S. is a bigger market than Mexico. And so for that reason, you have U.S. letter size predominant in Mexico. Although, from what I heard from people on the ground there, the reality is that it's actually kind of mixed. So for like notebook paper, people mostly use U.S. letter. A4 is sometimes prevalent. Notebooks coming from China, from Asian countries. There's also, larger sort of sizes. I think are metric actually, like A2 is a larger size, or A3. So the reality, what I wanted to say about this map is that it's not as clear cut as just US letter or A4. In America, in the United States, it's very rare to find an A4 paper. Pretty much, I've never seen it unless like somebody brought it over from Europe or from Asia or something. But in Mexico, you might actually find A4 notebooks and A4 printer paper. And in a place like, these other Latin American countries like Colombia, Peru, Chile, it's almost a 50-50 mix, really. These countries really are kind of on the borderline. And so, yeah, Venezuela, they just take whatever they can get, basically. So they actually kind of use both. Canada, I'm not sure. I'm assuming they, for the vast majority, use U.S. letter, but I'm not totally sure. I mean, the Quebec people really love their French, their metric system and everything. So maybe someone in Canada can give me a comment and tell me how it really is. And then, of course, the Philippines is an interesting case. So these are all countries that are very close to the U.S. economically, and the Philippines is very, very close to America economically and has been historically, right? Because we're talking about the 20th century here, which is when these paper size standards, for the most part, were really entrenched and established. And for most of the 20th century, the Philippines were either literally an American colony. I think starting from the Spanish-American War in 1898. The Philippines were U.S. territory up until, 1911 or something like that. I forget the exact history. They were given some sort of autonomy at some point, but they remained very close to the U.S. Politically and economically, and then, of course, they were occupied by the Japanese. And the U.S. still maintains a substantial military presence in the Philippines. Most educated people in the Philippines know English. So Philippines is very close to America, and for that reason, we get U.S. letter. Again, I would suspect, I don't have as much firsthand knowledge of the Philippines, obviously, but I would suspect that it's more of a mixed situation, kind of like some of these Latin American countries, where you might find U.S. letter or A4 depending on the situation or depending on what happened to be in stock that week at the store, who knows. So that's this map. So if we did actually talk about it in the past, I pretty much just duplicated a bunch of content. Let's open the comments. Might as well, I think, to get an answer to some of my questions here. Funny story, I immigrated to, oh yeah. Yeah, I swear I talked about this before, because I had a friend who came from Asia, and he was talking about, just a standard A4, right? Same story as this guy, basically. And they look at, Americans look at you and they're like, what do you mean A4? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's a good story. Yeah, this causes I'm sure it does. I'm sure it causes a lot of issues. F4 paper is commonly used in Indonesia, slightly longer and wider than A4. Wow, that's interesting. We had to use it in Malaysia as well until the 90s, 2000s. Japan has a separate paper system that's largely based on the A system, but has some special formats that are slightly larger. Maybe that is what F4 is. Let's see. So yeah, the metric paper system is cool. Again, I'm pretty sure I have that in a previous video. My office in the UK had a Dell printer which would always stop printing after 3 pages. I learned that's because Oh, okay, yeah. So there's a bug. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, American printers. Um, the paper was, yeah, okay. So this is a bunch of people's stories about how both are definitely popular, but A4 is most ubiquitous here in the Philippines. So that's, I'm from Tacloban City here. I have no idea what US letter is. Um, so it seems like it really depends on the region. I mean, Tacloban is, it's not Manila. I don't know if it's on the same island, but yeah, it seems like a regional variation here. Manila, of course, would be the capital and more globalized and more connected with the U.S. economy. So I'm scrolling through here just a little bit more just to see. So it says there's a mix of both, and yeah, it is a remnant of American colonialism, but not just explicit outright colonialism. It's also sort of indirectly because just the Philippine economy was tied to the U.S. Obviously, the United States never colonized Colombia or Chile, but just the sheer influence, the economic influence is very important. Chile, what are people saying here? Here it says, here in Colombia, everything is tamaño carta. I don't know what carta means. Does carta mean letter? Tamaño carta. Honduras, Ecuador, and Peru need to switch, so West Pacific is on lock. I don't understand this comment. Por debajo es tamaño carta. I'm guessing tamaño carta means letter size. You're saying, are we sellouts for using letter size? Get this xenophobic mentality out of your head. I think it's from Pinochet times. It's very interesting. Every country has a very intricate story for why they do one thing versus another. It's interesting, but we're going to move on. So here, this one has sound, and I have absolutely no idea if the sound is even going to come through. Actually, there's no point in, I think it's just music. So just imagine some sort of epic music playing in the background here. So this is an animation. And okay, here we go. I guess here it's beginning. So this is an island in the, I forget which came first, the IJsselmeer or the Zuiderzee. The Z came first, I think. So the Zuiderzee, right, in the Netherlands, where land was reclaimed, and this looks like Flevopolder. I'm not 100% sure, but it's some sort of polder, and you can see that it started off as like a tiny island, and then it was connected to a huge polder, and then it became a town basically, and so it expanded, and now there's pretty much not really a trace of the island. Actually, I am going to click on the comments because there is, I believe I've seen a photo. Let me see if I can look it up. The town is called Urk. So there's a very interesting photo of this town, kind of an aerial shot where you can still sort of see the island. These photos are terrible. I'm just kind of trying to find. Well, Wikipedia has a photo of the old. Okay, it's not. Oh, it is. Wait a minute, it's not Flevopolder. It's the other. It's this bigger one. It's the Noordoostpolder. Okay, yeah, the Northeast Polder. So here is what it used to look like, which is very cute. It's like, a nice little town, and I guess there's some sort of farm here. Very interesting. But there's no modern day photo from the air, but I guess I'm probably thinking of a different town. So yeah, just Dutch people being Dutch, as one comment pointed out. What can I say? Very, very interesting. And one thing another thing that I find interesting about this is that this animation was made by none other than Atlasova, who we know from other video, or other, I should say, maps. Sorry, I got a little distracted here with the chat because Rod GTA says that carta does mean letter. So good. That means my Spanish guessing skills are still pretty good. And so this Atlasova person, like I honestly, you know, this is kind of getting personal now, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, who are these people, or is this person? Is this one person? Is it an organization? Is it funded by someone? Because they seem to have gotten sort of really, really popular really fast. Am I a little bit jealous? Yeah, a little bit. But you know, it's just all depends on how much effort you put in. You know, you have to be consistent. You have to, you know, have a website, and you have to have mass appeal. Thing about these Atlasova maps, in my previous videos, I kind of criticized them for being, you know, maybe low quality or not very well researched, or kind of, you know, just kind of frivolous, kind of stupid maps. But hey, I mean, you know, that's the kind of stuff that becomes popular online. So I can't blame them for being, you know, more popular. But or I should say, for gaining so much traction in so little time, right? Because it's literally, this Atlasova group has only been or page, I should say, has only really existed for a few months, I think, maybe a year at most. And apparently, because this user has a Reddit account, u/Atlasova, apparently it's a Dutch guy. It's just one guy somewhere in the Netherlands. So anyway, now I know who Atlasova is. But yeah, man, whatever, you know, good for them. It's just a little bit frustrating for me as someone who tries to be more of an erudite connoisseur of maps. Some of their content, you know, is a little bit subpar for my tastes, but you know, maps are maps, so good for them. Okay, so is this the next one? What is the next one? Yeah, so countries that are feminine and masculine in French. So let's open this image here. How are we doing on time? So 30 minutes. Cool, we're doing good. Yeah, so, okay, there's no key, but I'm presuming that the pink countries are feminine and the blue countries are of masculine gender grammatically in French. So what is the pattern here? Basically, all the feminine names are pretty much based on Latin, or based on sort of old terms. So, you know, la France, la Russie, all the Latin sort of countries ending in IA, that in English oftentimes end in IA, like Russia, or Italia. I guess not in English, but you know, Italia. The Latin word for Spain is Hispania, Grecia. You know, Romania. So all the IA countries are all feminine. Same with Suedia, Norwegia. These are all the Latin sort of terms that, of course, became French once the French language kind of became separate. So that all makes sense. So the only, and then everything else basically is masculine. Everything that didn't come from Latin, pretty much, is masculine. You know, the United States, all the Stan countries. Iran is masculine because Iran, it was, I think, the 1920s when, or maybe 30s, when the Shah of Iran requested that other countries refer to what was until then called Persia. They refer to Persia as now Iran, which is, I suppose, the Iranian name for Iran is Iran. Persia was always kind of a term used by outsiders. And incidentally, Persia in French, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's feminine. La Persie, if I had to guess what it was, I would say La Persie. I could be wrong on that one, I'm not sure. Japan is interesting, right? Le Japon, I think, is the term in French, and it's interesting that it happens to be sort of an old country, right? I mean, the French have known about Japan for a while, right? China, India, Japan, the classic Asian nations. However, Japan is masculine, which is interesting. I guess China and India were known in, you know, biblical times, in Roman times, whereas Japan only really became known to Europe, I would say in the 16th century, starting in the 16th century maybe. maybe it was known prior to that, but that was really when the first contact was established. It was either the Dutch or the Portuguese, I forget. But and the term Japan actually comes from, I think, a Chinese word, maybe a Hokkien word. These sort of coastal areas of southern China had their own language, and the area was called Japan, which became some sort of, I think it was the Portuguese who were the first to sort of encounter that and encounter those Hokkien merchants and add that word into the European vocabulary. So I suppose Japan is it's old by our 21st century standards, but it's new in terms of it's not something that the ancient Romans knew about. Now, of course, Bolivia, Colombia, Argentina, these are all newly invented words based on Latin, so that's why they're going to be pink here, feminine. And some of these African countries, I mean, Mauritania that's an old word that I think is even mentioned in the Bible. Same with Ethiopia. Let's see, what else? Zambia, Tanzania, Namibia. These are all newly invented country names. Tanzania actually is a combination of Tanganyika and Zanzibar. Those were the two provinces, and they just combined Tan and Zan and turned it into Tanzania, and now that's a word. Same with Pakistan. I forget it. PAK stood for something. Peshawar something, Kashmir. I forget, unfortunately, but I know that PAK is literally an acronym, and then that became Pakistan. So some of these newly created, and then Republic, right? Republic, Central African Republic. So there's a few other reasons why some of these random countries here are also feminine, but for the most part, it's either a Latin word or a newly created word. United Kingdom, right? Portugal is pretty much, I think, one of the few examples. Netherlands is Pays-Bas, the low countries, and I guess it's le pays. Pays, the French word for country, is masculine. So Denmark, I don't know what is it's Denmark, right? Denmark in French. Yeah, it is le Danemark. So that's kind of an odd sort of, well, it's a German Germanicism, and so that's kind of an exception there, because the other Germanic countries, pretty much without exception, I mean, except for the Netherlands, but that's a different story. But the Nordic countries and Germany are all feminine, using Latin names. So I would like to sort of compare this with other languages. It's interesting, and I think the reason why in Latin pretty much every country was feminine is related to the idea of the traditional idea of the earth as feminine. The earth, of course, the earth is feminine, and the earth and water are feminine in traditional symbolism, and air and light are masculine. And so because a country represents a section of the earth, and this is related to concepts like Mother Nature, for example. Everybody knows Mother Nature. The reason why it's Mother Nature and not Father Nature is because in traditional ancient symbolism across cultures, this is kind of the trend, sort of the, I don't want to get too deep here, but basically the matrix, the thing that sort of receives the seed and in which something grows. For humans, biologically, that's female, that's women, feminine. For the earth, if we're talking about plants and things like that, that's going to be the soil, the earth. So what I'd love to do is compare this with other languages. So I'm imagining that in other Romance languages, it's probably a similar story, maybe with a couple of exceptions here and there, which could be interesting to explore. Other languages like German or Russian, I'm trying to think if there's anything off the top of my head in Russian that's different. So in Russian, the word for China is Kitai, and Kitai is masculine. So that's different, and that's because the word for the French word for China comes again through, I believe, through Portuguese as well, or maybe not. Sina, the whole Sino. I don't know if Latin had it first. No, it's probably not through. It's probably through Latin. But the Russian word for China comes from the Khitai tribe of northern China, because that's actually how the Russians first encountered the Chinese. It was through Siberia and through Mongolia. And so the East Slavic languages have a different word for China than do most Western European languages. And so let's see. And so Stuart, it's fine. It's totally fine if you comment, because I think that makes the stream more interesting. I mean, I guess you could say maybe it is a little distracting, but it's fine. I have the comments kind of in a separate section of the screen, and so it's totally fine. I think it's always better to have more interaction. Yeah, totally fine. A great video that demonstrates what modern English could be like if it still had grammatical gender. I think so. I think Old English had grammatical gender. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, German is a Germanic language that still has grammatical gender. You know, das, der, and die are three different ways of saying the, depending on what the gender of the noun is. I'm not sort of an expert on German or Germanic languages aside from English, but yeah, it's interesting to think about. And it's interesting to think about why it is that English happened to be sort of the one language that really, sort of the Western European language that really kind of lost its gender for the most part, except for obviously referring to people. But, you know, we still have him and her, which Turkish, for example, doesn't. Turkish has just, I think it's just o, which means he or she, it's ambiguous. Hungarian as well doesn't have any grammatical gender whatsoever. But in English, I think the reason English lost its gender, I was reading about this, it has to do with trade, and it has to do with sort of the interplay between the Viking influence and the Norman influence from France, and sort of and of course the Celtic. And so wherever there's kind of a mixture, grammatical rules tend to be simplified. And so one of the simplest languages that we actually know of in terms of grammar is actually Malay, the language spoken in Malaysia and Indonesia. There's two separate norms of the language. You know, there's the Indonesian standard and the Malaysian standard, and they are officially considered two separate languages, but they're pretty much mutually intelligible. It's just a difference of how many Arabic versus Dutch versus English loanwords are. And so Malay, because Malay was a language of trade, it actually has an incredibly simple grammar. There's no declension, like there's no tense. There's no grammatical gender. There's anyway. I again, this is something I read on Wikipedia like several years ago. And Mandarin Chinese also. Mandarin is also a big language of trade, and so that's why, for example, there's no. Well, Mandarin is complicated for other reasons. You know, tone and learning the characters is hard. But in terms of actual grammar, Mandarin is really not that hard at all. It's just, you know, I go here. And if you want to say, like, I went, you can't say that. You have to say, I already go here, or I go yesterday, you know? So there's, the tense of the verb is created just through context, basically. So in general, whenever there's mixtures and trading going on and lots of sort of foreigners having to learn your language, you get a simplification of grammar. Of course, the tenses in English are quite complicated, famously. So that's something that didn't get super duper simplified, but you could argue that, and you know, I know lots and lots of people, you know, myself coming from an immigrant family to the United States, you know, coming from an immigrant community, I know that you can pretty much get by. English is one of those languages that's very easy to be decent at. Like it's very easy to pick up enough English to survive and to go about daily life, but it's very, very hard to become expert at English, because there are so many tiny little trivialities having to do with tense and articles and word order and things like that. That it's you can pretty much instantly tell whether or not somebody was grew up with English or not. It's pretty easy to tell. Although I remember learning that Joseph Conrad, the famous writer, grew up in Poland and English was not his first language, and he's quite a good writer. So I don't know. I suppose there's geniuses out there. So yeah. Anyway, one thing I'd love to do is compare this with other languages. Are there any other? I was trying to think of examples in Russian that sort of contradicted this. For the most part, it's really similar. So Egypt, Yegipet in Russian is masculine. Algeria is masculine. What else? But all the European countries in Russian pretty much are feminine, same as in French. So for the most part, except for China, Egypt, Algeria, they are very similar, Russian and French, in terms of the grammatical gender that they assign to country names. All right, this is another one here, and I'm going to stop, I think, when I hit the top. My plan was to do the top 10. So we're at number 8, and this is all bike paths in the Netherlands. Simple map, but still fascinating. I don't believe that these are all the bike paths in the Netherlands. There has to be way more than that. Once again, I have not opened up the comments in advance, but I'm pretty sure that they will mention that. I mean, there's absolutely no way. You just look at where Amsterdam is supposed to be, and there's just a bunch of blank spaces. So that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I think there are many more when you zoom in, right? So that's what I would imagine. And I mean, hey, that's awesome. I think it's a really cool aspect of Dutch culture. This whole thing. By the way, before I forget, because I guess there's one person watching. I don't know if it's Stuart or someone else, but I hope the sound is okay. And if it's not, I'll try to fix it in the next video. But I hope it's not like maxing out or clipping or anything. So hopefully the sound is okay. But anyway, yeah. So the Netherlands has this biking culture, and I think that I haven't really studied this in depth. One thing that I do know is that the Netherlands is extremely flat. Pretty much everywhere that, where the vast majority of Dutch people live. It's very flat. And that makes it, thanks Stuart, sound is fine, great, good to hear. The fact that the Netherlands are so flat makes it much easier to bike than other places. And part of that is, so I was never really like a biker, like as a kid. I mean, obviously, I learned how to ride a bike and stuff and did it for fun, but not for, not to actually get to places. Growing up in the U.S. suburbs, you're pretty much bound by car, pretty much everywhere. But in college, I biked a lot, and I learned, a few things. Chicago is where I went to school. It's very flat, just like the Netherlands, and so people had fixed gear bicycles, fixies, and fixie bikes are way cheaper. First of all, they're cheaper to buy than variable speed bikes, like mountain bikes, or more advanced sort of road bikes. They're very cheap, and they're much easier to maintain. So you can pretty much do all the repairs yourself without really breaking a sweat or spending hours in the workshop. And so that's, I think, a huge factor also why biking is so prevalent in the Netherlands. Again, because it's just so flat and it's so easy to use a fixed gear bike. This really just makes it easier to maintain and cheaper as well, so much more accessible to ordinary people. So those are my thoughts on on Dutch biking. Let's see if there's anything else in the comments here that is of note. Yeah, obviously this map does not do justice to the full amount of bike paths. And there was a link here. Many of the maps are missing. Many of the missing paths are on this map. I'm getting, what is this, OpenStreetMap? Or, yeah, this is OpenStreetMap. So this seems a little different from this map in the sense that the cities are denser. Obviously, Amsterdam, we have Rotterdam, The Hague. But the countryside has less paths than this would indicate. But because this is OpenStreetMap, I'm guessing that maybe some of the countryside roads just haven't been really mapped out. Sorry, the countryside bike paths. Although Germany and the Netherlands are pretty much like the most precisely extensively mapped countries out there in terms of OpenStreetMap. So the data quality for OpenStreetMap in the Netherlands is extremely high, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But anyway, this map it's aesthetic, you could put it that way. It's a work of art. Okay, here's number 9, and this is how much land would the Attack on Titan walls cover if they were built in the real world? Okay, this is actually a slideshow. I didn't know that. Slovakia. So whoever made this obviously is French. So one thing that I wanted to point out that I have in my notes here is that I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but is this a reference to the Tennessee Titans football team, right? Because they're based in Nashville, and that's kind of where these circles are centered on. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if that's was meant to be on purpose or not. So let's see. There was something else. Oh yeah. Well, I was just going to say that. So Attack on Titan is an anime TV series. It's very popular. I've heard great things about it. People have told me to watch it. I haven't had time to watch it. I know there's like a bunch of episodes. So yeah, so I can't say much. But I guess the premise is that there's like these giant monsters that are outside the walls. There's a huge system of walls, and there's like these monsters outside the walls. So there we go. Attack on Tennessee Titan. That's what I think this map is showing. Okay, and finally, number 10. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop with this one, but most popular boy name in each state, U.S. state in 2020. And actually, at this point, this map is old. So, there we go. At this point, this map is old. It's been 2 years, right? We should have 2021 data. Because generally these trends last approximately, I would say between 3 and 5 years. So, for example, we see here that the name Liam is popular. The name Oliver is popular here in the northern section of the U.S. And between 3 and 5 years from now, it'll pretty much be over. Liam and Oliver might still be in the top 10, but they're not going to be number 1. So that's kind of how these trends work. So my big thing here is that child names are very interesting because they reveal subtle aspects of culture that are often not seen or discussed because they're so subtle and so hard to sort of put into words, and so oftentimes they're not discussed. So what do I mean by this? Well, if we look at this map here, right, in 2020, there's clearly some sort of geographical pattern going on. It's not just random states with random names. And there are some explanations for this, partly, and I'll get into my best guess at some of the explanations here. But you know, even with some of my explanations, they don't really. I can't really totally explain this divide, for example, between Liam and Oliver. You know, that's kind of the big one here. It's not totally clear, you know, what all the Liam states have in common as opposed to the non-Liam states. And so clearly there's an underlying factor here. There's a pattern, but we just don't know what it is. We can't put it into words, but it exists. And so that's why I found these. I always find these popular child name maps very interesting, very, very interesting. So the top names here are Liam, Oliver, and Noah. And there's a few other names in a few other states. Lucas, if I'm not mistaken, Lucas is an older trend that I think died out. So I think New Hampshire was sort of behind on the Lucas thing. The other exceptions to the Noah, Oliver, Liam are Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina. And what these states have in common is they have a very high black population. So the names James and William are more common in these states. Of course, I'm not certain, but presumably because those names are more popular with black parents, and because Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina are approximately 30% black by population, they're going to sort of reveal that, sort of separate cultural environment, I guess you could say. Now, the name Noah, so Noah is a Jewish name from the Bible, meaning it means like rest or break or respite. Of course, everybody knows the story of Noah's Ark. God was, I suppose, angry and sent a flood, but before that, he told Noah to build an ark, and Noah put all the animals in the ark and so on. And his name means a break or a rest from the destruction, basically, because he was the one that sort of he had that little bubble, in his ark, in his ship. So in a way, the name Noah also kind of means ark in a sense, because outside is the flood and the storm going on, but he is the respite from God's punishment. So that's Noah. And it seems like, incidentally, I don't know if this actually makes any sense or not, but the name Noah seems to be more popular in these states that do have a higher Jewish population as a percentage. Of course, the exception here being New York and New Jersey, and I guess Florida to some extent. Those three states have a very high Jewish population, but they don't seem to have Noah as a popular name. But there's a bunch of other ethnicities there that might outweigh those things. And of course, Jews alone they're only 2% of the US population, so they don't actually, there's not enough Jews for them solely to determine which name is most popular, but they can certainly, community effects and cultural trends and things like that. These are all very blue states, for example, with the exception of Pennsylvania. Again, it's not totally clear, but I do find that interesting. Then we have Liam. Liam is just the Irish short form of William, and so it's one of those names, kind of like Jack or Mike, that's not really its own name. It's kind of a nickname, but at this point, it's become sort of its own name. But traditionally, it's just a form of the name William. And then we have Oliver, which is a name of sort of old French or British origin, early Middle Ages. It could be Latin or it could be Germanic. It's actually not totally clear which one it is, at least according to what Wikipedia says about the latest sort of scholarship. So, of course, there are Romance versions of the name Oliver, Olivier, and so on. And so that's kind of the mainstream theory, is that it is a Latin name, but there are also possible Germanic etymologies. And the interesting thing is that if you look, I was saying earlier that it's not clear what the difference is between the Oliver states and the Liam states. But one thing that is sort of clear, and again, this isn't this 100% rule, there's exceptions to this, but the Oliver states do have a much higher percentage of German ethnicity, German descent. Ancestry is the word I was looking for. Meanwhile, the Liam states have a much higher percentage of British ancestry, whether it's English, Scotch-Irish, so like Ulster Scots, or Irish. Those ancestries predominate in the southern part of the United States, basically the Confederate states, as well as West Virginia, Kentucky, southern Missouri, and it's very closely aligned with this Liam region. The exceptions, of course, are Ohio, New York, New Jersey, Nebraska, potentially Colorado. Those theoretically should all be sort of Oliver land, but they seem to be Liam. So I think so it's obvious, right, that there is a difference between Black American culture and White American culture, and that would explain differences in name preferences. I think that's pretty straightforward. However, the differences within White American culture between German ancestry, Scandinavian or German ancestry versus more French, English, Irish ancestry, as we have in the southern states, that is, I think, a cultural difference that's not actually very discussed in American society, because again, it's all sort of white people, quote unquote. But I think, in fact, this may or may not be sort of an example, or maybe a sign that there are, in fact, differences between. And just anecdotally, just in my experience, I grew up in Virginia, a southern state. I grew up in a part of Virginia that is not particularly southern culturally. In terms of ancestry, it's very mixed. We have people from the South, but we have people moving to Northern Virginia from all around the country. But I definitely remember going to Chicago for school and just looking at the people that lived in Chicago and noticing that they just looked different. They were white people, but they were different white people. And what I would find out is that the predominant white ancestries in Chicago are German and Eastern European, such as Polish, Czech, Slovak, Lithuanian, and as well as people from Scandinavia. Those were the predominant white ancestries in Chicago. Of course, there's Irish, there's Italians, but those are kind of pockets, and they were not in the area that I was in. And so that's different from Virginia, Maryland. Those populations are descended mostly from English, English, Irish. In West Virginia, very heavy Scotch-Irish presence. So slightly different ethnic makeup and potentially slightly different culture. Anyway, one kind of last thing to say on this is that this is 2020. There are, like I said, trends, and so I'm trying to remember. Let's see. So Liam, I believe, is a new trend. Oliver is, if you go back, I might as well pull it up at this point. Here, let me look. 2018 boy names by state. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so hopefully this is visible. Let's just blow up this image here. So in 2018, Liam was quite a bit more popular. And actually, seeing the name William here in these upland South states where there's less of a black population makes me think that I might have been wrong in my previous assessment. William might, truly be a white Southern thing, but this is all speculation because this is something that is not really discussed, And unfortunately, I would have to spend, weeks researching this to really get like a firm answer that I'm confident in. So again, disclaimer, this is all speculation, but my original point was that here in 2018, Liam is present in these regions that became sort of these Oliver regions. And here we see Oliver taking over. So in 2022, which is, I guess, the current year, Liam probably has declined and Oliver probably has taken over, but maybe is already being replaced by sort of some other name in some states. So anyway, I could ramble about this forever. I probably should move on. It's just, I just think it's fascinating. And I guess what I'm really trying to say is I want to, at some point, have a little data project, little side project to just track these changes in popular names for boys and girls and see if they just correlate with anything. If they correlate with, ethnicity, economic factors, maybe even political election results. I think that would be really interesting. Imagine if you could predict the results of an election based on which names are common. I think you genuinely could do that. For example, the victory of Donald Trump in 2016 was sort of unexpected by traditional pollsters, but they weren't looking at these like subtle cultural things that I think really help determine these election outcomes. So I'd love to try that just as a data project. Or if someone else wants to try it and publish the results, I would gladly take a look and review those results or contribute to that because we're all busy and so on. So interesting potential project idea. Now Stuart has some comments here. So from the late 40s to 60s, Peter was one of the most popular names here in Australia. I personally know possibly a dozen Peters. Yeah, I mean Peter. I guess that's what it was in Australia. Actually, funny enough, there was what's it called? I think it was Liam. Liam was very popular in Australia in 2015, I want to say. Anyway, there's I don't know what the pattern is exactly, but there's some sort of relationship between names that are popular in Australia and then they spread to the US, but also, vice versa. Obviously, Australia is very heavily influenced by US culture. And so that's another interesting thing to see. Do American names spread to Australia in terms of popularity? Very interesting. Although in the 40s and 60s, Australia was much less connected to the United States, and so I'm sure the Peter phenomenon was probably purely Australian, or perhaps maybe even influenced more by British culture or something. I mean, God knows. And it's funny how Muhammad is a common Middle Eastern name and Jesus is rather rare in the Western world, says Stuart. I would say that's not quite true. So Muhammad certainly is very common in some Muslim countries, not all. And so similarly to, and again, I don't remember which Muslim countries are the ones where Muhammad is not typically a more popular given name. But Jesus is very popular in Latin American countries as Jesus. Jesus is a very common name in, certainly in Mexico and Puerto Rico. I don't know about the other Latin American countries. I'm not sure about Portuguese-speaking countries, Brazil, Portugal. I don't know, maybe Angola and others. I don't know if Jesus is a common Portuguese name, but yeah. Also, Joshua is a very common name in, in the U.S. certainly. Emmanuel is a fairly common name in Latin American countries. Joshua, Emmanuel, what else? Salvador is a common Spanish name. And these are all, of course, names for Jesus, basically. So yeah, but I mean, you're certainly onto something, Stuart, in the sense that Muhammad's name was Muhammad, like directly, like there's a direct. People are naming, exactly after, after him. And honestly, I don't know why it is that, for example, in England, nobody is named Jesus, right? In England, but in Spain, there's plenty of people named Jesus. So I don't know. I don't know what the reason for that is. And so, no idea that Sasha was a unisex name. It's, how do I say this? There's pretty much three different like use cases for the name Sasha. So the two sort of old traditional use cases are in Russia, Ukraine, pretty much every Slavic country, Serbia certainly. The name Sasha is a nickname for Alexander. And the way that comes about is because Alexander is Alexander, and because the main syllable is Sa, Alexander, then you add a suffix to that. The Sha suffix is a very common sort of male nickname suffix in Slavic languages. And so Alexander becomes Sasha, which is anglicized as Sasha. And so that's, for example, that's, I don't know, Sacha Baron Cohen is Jewish, but a lot of his ancestors are from Eastern Europe. Sasha Vujicic was a basketball player. I don't know if he still plays, from I think Serbia or something, or Croatia. So in that sense, Sasha is short for either Alexander, or Alexandra, which is Alexandra, the feminine version of Alexander. But in most Slavic countries, Alexander is a much more common name than Alexandra, the feminine version. But I suppose it is technically unisex in Slavic countries, although typically it's more of a boy name in Slavic countries. And then there's I've come across some Indian people with the name Sasha, and those are pretty much entirely girls. In India, I've learned that in India, basically, if the name ends in A, it's pretty much guaranteed to be a girl's name. So that's kind of how it works there. I can't think of any examples. I unfortunately, this is kind of out of my depth here. I'm not really Indian, but the point is that you can kind of take so the Western equivalent of Sasha is Alex. Exactly, Stuart. Yeah, perfect. And some people say, why don't I go by Alex? And it's just sort of it's a personal choice, but it also kind of wasn't a choice. It just sort of happened. It's what my friends called me during my childhood, and then it kind of spread, and then that's kind of how I became known on the internet. But because my career is based on the internet, I sort of became Sasha even in work settings. So it's a long story, but it's who I am, and I'm certainly not the only one. There's a few people who do go by Sasha in English, while their legal name is Alexander. A few people in the West, I should say. Pretty much everybody in Russia goes by Sasha, whose name is Alexander. But what I was saying about India was that so Sasha is some sort of Indian, not too common, but somewhat, it's there. And I don't know the etymology. I don't know the story for that. I just know that it's from India. And then there's the black phenomenon, and that this is something I found out mostly in Chicago, again, because the area where I grew up in Virginia had very few black people, but Chicago has quite a few, especially the area around my university. And so when I would order like an Uber, or order food or something, my name would be listed as Sasha, and every single time, of course, the delivery people were mostly black. And every single time they would be confused. They would say, "Oh, I was expecting a girl," or "Oh, I didn't think blah blah," or they thought, maybe I was like her friend or her boyfriend or something. So I was bringing it for her, for this mysterious Sasha lady, because for some reason, and I don't know anything, I don't know how this works, but for some reason, in Black American culture, Sasha is a girl name. I don't know if it's based on India or if it's based on Russia. Natasha is another example of a Russian female nickname. Natasha is the Slavic nickname for Natalia, but in America, black people sort of took it. I guess you could say appropriated it, and it's a fairly common black girl name, basically, Natasha. And so Sasha rhymes with that, and so Obama's daughter is named Sasha, and he of course is not from Chicago, but he spent a good amount of time there, and I think his wife is from the Chicago area, but I'm not sure. So that's kind of an insight into that. And let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say? Not really. I just wanted to say that I think I enjoy this format. I think it's much easier for me to do this because once I stop the stream, I can just, go do other things instead of spending 3 hours editing a video. So anyway, hey, tune in next time. Again, I'm going to try to put these out weekly, and thanks for watching. So see you in the next video.